Greetings, exalted ones, and welcome to the first official episode of the Library of Xur podcast. I'm Jared. With me is my co-host, Andrew. Today we're going to be talking about and dissecting one of the legend classic novels, Heir to the Empire, the first book in the highly acclaimed and respected Thrawn trilogy.
Now, if you're wondering what we mean by the word legends, you're probably not alone. Put simply, a legends book is anything that is published prior to the Disney acquisition. So, although these books aren't really considered canon anymore, they are still some highly enjoyable science fiction stories that we are really excited to discuss with you. So, we will start where it all started, Heir to the Empire.
Now, again, super quick background on this book. I know some of you may have watched the introduction little episodes we did on the Instagram page, but this was the first real mainstream of the old Expanded Universe Legends novels to get published. Let me double check that real fast. It says right here it was 1991 was when the hardcover came out. So even before episode 1 and some of that those other things came out, this book was here. Now there's a huge whole other universe of books in this old Legends timeline, if you want to call it that. Some even before this book chronologically. However, since this is the first really big one and it's responsible for so many story and plot points and locations and characters that are used throughout the other books, we figured we'd start with this first. It's a good foundation for really people to jump in at.
Right, yeah. I wrote down here, I looked up publication dates, and there were 7 books published before the Thrawn trilogy. They involved Han Solo and Lando. But it's this trilogy that really kicks off the Legends timeline. This is, like we mentioned in the prologue view, for Legends, this is year 0. Everything is launched from this point.
Right. So if we jump right into that in the first chapter, you can kind of imagine it. If you wanted to say there was an opening crawl, we could say that after the second Death Star was destroyed, the Imperials' influence really started to diminish and go down. They're really, really suffering because they lost all those ships. Of course, Vader and the Emperor, all those, promising upcoming officers, a lot of them were lost during that battle in the Return of the Jedi movie. So we kind of jump right in. We see something that you might not be used to seeing. It's more of the Imperials kind of playing the hiding and on the run type of situation right off in that first chapter.
Yeah, I wrote down here that the book opens much like each film of the original trilogy with a a Star Destroyer flying through a starscape. Right. Just like every original movie. So right away, the author, Timothy Zahn, tries to tie in to the original trilogy and make it instantly feel like Star Wars.
Now, there's so much packed into that first chapter. I didn't get specific notes because you could really do a huge amount of breakdown just on that very first action that happens. But basically, you get to find out right away one of the first characters, Thrawn, who the trilogy is named after. You see that he's a different type of Imperial officer. For one, he's an alien, which is a little bit unusual for the Empire. And also, They make very clear just how good he is from a tactical standpoint. He basically commands his one Star Destroyer versus multiple Rebel capital ships and wins despite them being outnumbered and despite the other officers really being worried that they should withdraw and leave.
Yeah, and in that first encounter, he hardly even gets alarmed about anything. He knows exactly what he wants to do, and he knows exactly when he wants to do it. And to his crew's credit, they do exactly what they're told when they're told to do it. And you can see right away that Thrawn's ship and crew is a very well-oiled machine, even though they are the minority and in hiding right now.
Right. And another thing that we're going to touch on a lot throughout the rest of the podcast is he seems to have this innate sense of who he's going against and what their thought process would be. He actually says that based on the ship movements, he knows what species is in command of the group attacking him, and because of that, he's able to figure out a strategy that they're unable to deal with.
I'm going to be completely honest. That is completely beyond me. I do not understand how Thrawn is able to do that, but he does it time and again. I wrote down that he's almost like Sherlock in a way, and just true. he's able to predict and see what's going to happen before it even happens. And us as the audience are in Captain Pellion's shoes. Pellion's a new character. Gilad Pellion, right? Yeah. He's pretty much Thrawn's right-hand man, and he is just like us, a step or two behind. So if Thrawn is Sherlock, Pellion is definitely Watson, and he's definitely learning from what's going on around him.
And the funny thing is he's painted as a pretty experienced officer, and even he has, no idea what's happening sometimes, but because of his loyalty, he goes along with it, and we can see that they become a pretty good foil for the heroes to try to overcome. Yeah.
Yep. So moving on, we get to chapter 2. This is about page 13. Luke encounters his last Force Ghost visit of Obi-Wan, which is pretty significant given the big picture of it all, where Luke had the guidance of Obi-Wan the entire original trilogy, and here we are in the second chapter of a brand new book, and Obi-Wan is basically signing off and moving on into the Force.
Right, and even though a little time has gone by, if you think about it, really, like A New Hope to Return of the Jedi, that spanned about, 2 years or so. I don't know if there's an exact count on that. And then this book takes place, I believe, in the neighborhood of 7 years after the Battle of Yavin. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about a span of 7 years as all the all the mentoring and guidance he gets.
Yeah.
Something that's nice, though, that I appreciated, there was a line right when Obi-Wan was leaving. He told Luke had said basically something to the effect of, what am I supposed to do? I'm all by myself. I am the last Jedi, which may sound familiar to some people talking about Disney movies and such, but basically right as he leaves, Obi-Wan says, you're not the last of the old Jedi, but rather the first of the new Jedi, which is a very cool line, because it really, I don't think they knew back then at the time, but that really set up this whole huge gallery of possibilities for the future, just with all of these different things. He was going to face new threats, but he would find new friends and allies and, continue that journey.
Right, yeah, and I wrote down here, there's no real new territory explored in these novels, so to speak, but in regards to let me say that again. Take 2. There's no real territory explored in regards to the Force, but Luke's final encounter with Obi-Wan's Force Ghost kind of brings to my mind Yoda's statement, always in motion is the future. It kind of makes me think of the Force. The Force is constantly moving and flowing. And to repeatedly manifest itself as a Force Ghost to visit Luke would contradict the very nature of the Force itself. So although it's a little alarming to happen this soon, it makes sense, because the future is always moving forward. The Force is always moving forward. All these things are working together in this galaxy far, far away. So it totally makes sense in that mindset that this would be the last visit of Obi-Wan.
Right. And that's something that it actually doesn't get touched on until quite a long time in the future as far as books. Even just a few years ago, like one of the very last Legends books, they do a little more explanation. So like you said, they kind of keep it moving, which is nice, because we don't have to always be stuck on those things. It gives them some new opportunities to create and write some things. And speaking of new introductions, we got those 2 new characters, but then in the same thing in this second chapter, all of a sudden we just start getting character after character after character being introduced. One of somebody that's a personal favorite to both of us, Talon Card, gets introduced pretty quick.
Yes.
And I think one of these days it might be fun for anybody out there if they ever get to listen to the audiobook for this to see who you would like to play these people in real life, because they almost give him this. They give him this like swashbuckling, almost Zorro type personality to him. He has this like sophistication and this, and I don't know, just this way about him. And I know we've had our personal thoughts on that, but anyways, it's a totally different type of character than what we normally see. So, kind of almost introducing another Han Solo type, even though we will get to see Han Solo in this book later. But another one of those kind of, I want to stay out of it. I just want to do my thing, live my life. But then he gets dragged into this large overarching story. Terrific side character.
Yeah, he almost is without the split second decisions and deduction, and able to foresee more or less what is going to happen. He's kind of the opposite of Thrawn. He's very observant. He's always paying attention. He takes care of his crew. His crew's very well trained, and they do a good job of doing their jobs, and he has, for all intents and purposes, a well-oiled machine. It says that he is the one that took over Jabba's operations.
Right.
So he's the new Jabba, but he's much better looking,
and not quite as dastardly and evil either. I mean, he's still breaking the law and making money, but he's not, having people shot because they didn't make his dinner right or something like that, You mentioned Han earlier, and I wanted to point this out, that our introduction to Han Solo in this novel is almost identical to his introduction in A New Hope. Right.
It's him and sitting back enjoying a drink in the Mos Eisley Cantina itself.
Right.
And he's meeting somebody, and but I thought that was interesting that his introduction is just as you would remember it from A New Hope, and it's another thing that just ties it straight into the movies and makes you feel like, yep, this is definitely Star Wars.
Right. And I misspoke on that. He actually is in Chapter 2. He's doing that little smugglers meeting, but he kind of almost takes a backseat in the plot for a little bit, just because we're getting everything rolling here. Let's see. And then we're still dealing with Talon Karrde. If we move over closer to Chapter 3, we get another character that's going to be around for a long time in the novels. Mara Jade.
Yeah.
So, very mysterious character initially. Kind of people are basically saying they don't know much about her past. They just know that she is an expert pilot, a marksman, perfect fit in a smuggling organization. But even her employer, Talon Karrde, who is an expert at finding out people's history and backstory, hardly knows anything about her.
Has had no luck. Yeah. She's a very rough around the edges character, especially for a female. You would think that a new female lead character would be instantly likable, and at first she isn't really.
She's really rude, to be honest. I mean,
she's
borderline rude.
And, she's gruff and all those things, and you don't, like I said, you don't really like her. And then as the novel progresses, as the Legends timeline progresses, like I mentioned, she becomes a fan favorite of all types of readers. Right, and
there's so much with her. I mean, you're going to kind of have to just watch along with us and read along with us, because character gets very, very developed, and we're definitely not going to spoil any of that.
Yeah.
So then, kind of moving into Chapter 4, a unique creature that I think we've only really seen images of it in the new Disney stuff. I don't think we've actually seen the Islamari. Really, there's a couple really weird pronunciations in this book, so we're going to go off the audio version if we don't know.
And we think that the author himself was involved with the audio version, so if he says this is how it's pronounced, we're going to just copy that.
So we get Islamari, which, again, we're kind of getting an insight into Thrawn. They land on this new planet. They're going to basically find a warehouse of the Emperor's equipment and artifacts. And Thrawn is convinced that they need this creature, this animal, to help them deal with a dark Jedi. So I'll get your thought on that, Andrew.
Yeah, Thrawn is very good at playing his cards close to the chest. He'll tell you exactly what you need to know at the moment you need to know it. And he little by little, he releases information to Pelion. We need these creatures. Why? Well, you'll see why. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, where'd you say we're in chapter 4?
Yep. So about page 45 is where we kind of get the big reveal as to what these lizards actually do.
They are a force-negating creature that spend all of their lives in trees or clinging to something.
Right, if attached to trees. Yeah.
Yeah, if they're on the ground, they end up dying. So he gets a bunch of these gigantic trees. Where are they, at Merkur?
Yes.
They get
them from Talon Card, actually. That's how we get the introduction, is he has a base on the planet where most of these creatures live. And so him playing, I'm just looking out for myself, I don't want to get involved, he goes ahead and basically sells or trades with Thrawn for these creatures.
Yeah, and they're a force. That's their self-defense mechanism. Is, as Obi-Wan said in A New Hope, the Force penetrates everything and binds the galaxy together. But these creatures somehow know how to negate that effect. So any Force-sensitive creature or person, they can't tap into the Force because of these creatures. It
actually goes a little farther than that. On page 45, they show you how effective these creatures are, because they get to the warehouse, they are looking for the Guardian. They see this basically kind of dirty, decrepit old man, basically, and he says that he killed the Guardian of the Mountain, and he's going to kill them as well. And he shoots the, familiar to anyone watching the movies, Force lightning at them. And all of a sudden, it just stops kind of at this circular range. It just stops before it even reaches them. So not only does it stop a person from using the Force if they're in the bubble, but anything in the bubble cannot be influenced either. So the lightning immediately disappears as soon as it hits the bubble. So just kind of setting up how powerful these creatures are if they're able to basically stop somebody like the Emperor from using his powers.
They would have been very useful in the main trilogy. And speaking of this decrepit old man, he introduced himself as Jedi Master Joruus Sabayoth. Mm-hmm. And
good luck getting that from the page.
Yeah.
I had no clue how to pronounce that until I listened to the audiobook. It makes no sense.
I wish I could show you guys, but it's Joruus, Joruus, and then C with a little apostrophe, Baoth, Sabayoth.
I'll put a picture up and the guy up here so you can see the face and the spelling of this weird name that he has.
He looks like Gandalf.
Basically, yeah. Evil Gandalf.
Yeah. But this is our first introduction to a new Force user since Luke. And Luke dispatched of the other two known Force users in Return of the Jedi, and he thought he was alone, aside from Leia.
Right.
But here we are, introduced to a Jedi Master, Joruus Sabayoth. And he's... Let's see, where are we? 46, 47?
Yeah, we're in that chapter 4 there, so anywhere you want to discuss that. More expert manipulation by Thrawn here, too, because, you generally consider Jedi, good or bad, as, very well-spoken and intelligent people, and even though they both have agendas, I feel like Thrawn is still able to play him a little bit, play off of his personality to get what he wants.
Yeah, and, Sabayoth's kind of exile in where he's at, his no not having been with any sort of civilization kind of plays into Thrawn's hand. He's able to manipulate him a little bit because of how much Jorus Sabaoth has not seen.
And also in this same chapter, too, we kind of get our first look at something. I don't know if anybody out there has played any of the fantastic Knights of the Old Republic games, but there's a ability in there called Battle Meditation, where basically a really powerful Force user is able to, sit in one place and kind of extend his senses out and make everybody with him on his side fight better, work better together as a team. And this is where it's implied by Thrawn that the reason the Imperials were so threatening during the heyday of the Empire, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, even Return of the Jedi for a little bit, Rogue One, all these movies, they were so effective, not just because superior numbers, but because the Emperor was actually controlling them all in some way from afar. Yeah. Which is a really powerful, really scary thing to think about. And he's basically Thrawn's saying here that he wants the same type of abilities out of this Master Sabaoth. And again, just like we said before, so many new things introduced in this book, and this idea, this particular Force power, another one.
Yeah, still on page 46, I wrote down there is a Force power that Sabaoth uses that in the Galaxy Far, Far Away timeline happens 26 years later in the new canon. There is, let's see here, somebody shoots at Sabaoth and he stops the bolt in midair. Sounds an awful lot like Kylo Ren.
It really does. I think in this particular instance, he's holding a crossbow bolt in midair.
Yes, I should have clarified.
But again, that's the ability to do that is, again, we can see parallels. Disney has even admitted that even if they don't make these stories canon, they will feel free to take and use these ideas, and we can see starting even from this how much influence it had on things that came later for sure.
Right.
And I think it's in the same chapter here. Actually, it's not. So are you good on chapter 4?
Yeah, they make a few references to the Clone Wars and stuff. I did want to say that with the we make the revelation Jorus Sabaoth is actually a clone of another Jedi.
Right.
Now, the Clone Wars and the cloning process was largely unexplored at this point. All we had were the references itself in the original trilogy. Mm-hmm. So at this point, they didn't know exactly what it was because Lucas hadn't even started to write the Phantom Menace and all the other movies that involve the Clone Wars. So the author felt like it was safe to make these story decisions. But then Lucas wrote that and kind of screwed everything up a little bit. So in future books, they start to make amends and start steering the narrative in the right direction. So even though this isn't exactly right compared to the Clone Wars we actually know, that stuff is actually steered in the right direction later on in other books.
Right, and they do retcon it a little bit. I think the Sparty cylinders are actually what the clone masters on Kamino use. They're just fleshed out and given more details, and I think some timelines for how long the clones take to grow up has changed. Again, still laying groundwork, but yeah, some of this is very different compared to the prequel movies that we ended up getting just 8 years after this.
Yeah. Yep. Chapter 5, I didn't have much notes. I didn't really think much happened. We get introduced to another new character, a Bothan, right?
Correct.
Yeah, he's a Bothan. Borsk Phalia, and he is a new senator type.
This guy.
He is...
That's my thoughts, pretty much. I mean, it's complete fantasy, obviously, but and we will, never make any, real life parallels or anything like that. But just that annoying guy you all know that just somehow always seems to be able to get his way or spin things to his advantage. You know, the guy who always gets out of speeding tickets and is able to sweet talk his way into anything. That's this guy. And the funny thing is, he's one of the good guys, and I couldn't stand the guy.
He's one of the good guys. He doesn't do anything to directly hurt or harm our heroes, but he does all he can to annoy the crud out of them.
Pretty much, yeah. And so, again, another character introduction. And, yeah, so we'll go ahead and we'll jump over to Chapter 6.
Moving on to Chapter 6 and 7, Luke, Han, and Leia, Chewie, and 3PO all land on a planet called Bimasari. The Bims are reluctant to discuss anything with Luke present. Apparently, they don't really like Force users or Jedi in general.
And this takes this is one of those things, just setting up the universe. This does not get explained for a long time. Other than there was a Dark Jedi that caused some problems during the Clone Wars, and it made them really uncomfortable around Force users. So again, if you stick with us, hopefully we have that episode someday. It is in some books and TV shows later, but for now, just they don't really get along with Force users. So Luke, of course, being the nice guy that he is, agrees to basically go and look at, I think it's some tapestries, I believe.
Yeah, he's going shopping.
Yeah, basically. And so this whole thing is kind of like one, I'll call it like a long take. You're kind of following them through this marketplace, basically.
Yeah, and the group actually gets split up, and the book alludes that that's what the Bims kind of wanted to happen, was to get them split up. Mm-hmm. Why? Because there's going to be an assassination attempt.
Or at least a kidnapping attempt. Basically, we get to about chapter... I think it's chapter 7. They start to... Chapter 6, Han and Leia basically spot these guys. They're called the Nogri. Yep. They work for Thrawn. This is another new alien species we're getting introduced to. Again, one that Disney borrows later, eventually.
You get to see them later on in a TV show.
And I can't remember if they say I have a bad feeling about this. I don't think they do, but I do know 3PO says we're doomed. So there's a good throwback. And then we get to Chapter 7, and we get to see Luke in action, finally. We get to see what he's doing after Return of the Jedi. And we kind of get kind of a glimpse into his character, if you will.
Yeah.
I'll give you my thoughts on that after you discuss this sort of action scene a little bit.
Okay, so Luke, let me get on the right page because I don't want to go off memory and misquote anything. But
it's page 71.
He realizes that Leia and Han are in distress because doesn't Leia kind of...
She mentally calls to him, yes. They still have that bond since they're brother and sister.
That brother and sister hotline.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden he's full alert and he's looking around and he notices what's going on. And he's getting surrounded, isn't he?
Yeah, they're basically working to surround him, and he tries to act like he's going to walk out the door, and they kind of almost reach for their weapons like, you need to come with us or else.
Yeah, and Luke, to his credit, acts very Jedi-like. He does all he can without his lightsaber, but eventually it gets to the point where he has to draw his blade and defend himself, and he's quick thinking, he's decisive. It's the Luke, the beginnings of the Luke that we all deserve.
Right, and the one that's one of our personal favorites. As a matter of fact, I believe the way Zahn words it is when Luke finally realizes that he can't talk him out of it, he's very sad. But then he also throws his lightsaber one time and takes out all 7 of the bad guys.
Now, speaking of that, Zahn has taken credit for inventing that technique of locking on the lightsaber and throwing it. But if I remember right, Darth Vader did the exact same thing.
He does it in Return of the Jedi. He throws it
throwing it at Luke.
Yeah.
So, is Zahn mistaken here, or is this a different technique? It's up for debate, I'm sure. But that's something I noticed, and I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still a great scene where Luke just single-handedly, almost literally, just takes out 7 or 8 of those bad Nogri kidnapping type.
And then they do a little bit. They do a little bit more with him. I love Zahn's writing, but I personally I'm usually good at visualizing, but the part where he basically escapes out of this, like, I kind of envision it almost as like a castle, like, tower that these tapestries are in. And then he basically runs and jumps across a windswept rooftop to get down to the market. I always kind of read through that a little fast. Like, I appreciate that he's able to use the Force to, like, help his balance and everything, but that part for me is a little bit... I want to try to be honest when I'm doing these books. That part's a little hard for me to read. I mean, he got down. That's the important part that we need to know. But I kind of like to fast forward to when we get to see the other people in action a little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that may have just been, okay, he's here, but we need him here. Have him jump out the window.
He does get to swing on a rope from the Stokely spray stick, which is also another new piece of technology. Instead of a blaster, it basically shoots a giant... it almost shoots... I imagine it shooting like... kind of like party tracer-looking stuff that turns into basically a net that will capture people and basically taser them. So something that will work on everybody. It'd work on Luke. It would work on a Wookiee. Like, it's a good weapon if you're trying to kidnap people. And he uses it to basically turn it into a rope swing and swings down from the turret onto the ground. So we do get to see those spray sticks later in the different books as well. Let's see. So now we got to, like, page 80, 81. I think we're still in chapter 7.
Yep.
So we get to see the other heroes kind of spring into action a little bit. Let's see.
Han is as Han as ever. He's cranky about what's going on, and he's cranky about having to fight, and he's just generally cranky.
Right.
He doesn't like being in this situation.
Something I noticed, too, really quick as they are able to escape and get away is we get to see that it's not just Han that's the fantastic pilot. I mean, we get to see this later in Solo, and then also in The Last Jedi movie. Chewie finally gets to show off his piloting skills a little bit, but that line in Solo, he's, hundreds of years old and a very experienced person, despite, us not really being able to understand what he's saying. And so he does this almost like hard stop right over the head of the heroes and is able to cover them using the turret that Han has on the underside to basically help take out all these attackers and allow them to escape. So I thought it was nice. We got to see him do something besides growl and punch things, basically.
Yeah.
He really is a good mechanic and a good pilot. In the books, you get to see his personality and his other skills a little bit more than just breaking stuff.
Almost makes you think that he was probably the getaway driver back in the smuggling days with Han and him.
Probably.
Moving on to chapter 8, I really didn't have much here. It didn't really seem all that standing out as far as the rest of the book goes. It was mostly what I wrote was a conversation between Thrawn and Pelion and Sabaoth, and then another conversation between Han and Leia and Mon Mothma. A Mon Mothma cameo, actually.
Again, and then really super quick, I forgot, I'm going to just jump back really quick. Something that gets set up in the end of that chapter was Luke and Leia discussing when is Leia going to actually get trained and get her practice with her Force powers. Something that people may tend to forget is she's not just Luke's sister, she's also Anakin's daughter. So she has the same, technically the same potential that Luke has, being one of Anakin's children. So, might want to get your thoughts in the comment section. Again, please keep it civil, but some of these pages made me totally okay with the whole Last Jedi bit with Leia flying through space, because we're going to see even more crazy things that Force users do in these Legends books. So surviving for vacuum in a few seconds is really nothing compared to things you're going to see later.
Yeah, exactly. She has, I mean, every person has potential for Jedi, being a Jedi or a Force user because of the nature of the Force. We'll not talk about midichlorians.
Right.
But her being the chosen one's daughter, everyone's potential is probably here, but hers is, up here right along with Luke. So she might have just some natural technique or natural skill, or however you want to say it.
Instinctive, maybe.
Yeah, it's you can't just write her off as she just got lucky, or that's just a writing. Real
quick too on that, you got to remember that in The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda and Obi-Wan basically admitted that they could train her if Luke failed. So
yeah,
she still had the same potential that he did. Something real quick. I know there's not a lot in those chapters you were talking about. Chapter 8, it's a lot of dialogue, but it kind of brought in something interesting about Thrawn that I noted. Again, it's just a couple quick sentences, but he showed that he's not the same type of leader that Vader or the Emperor is. Actually, in that chapter, somebody has an idea about how to do something, and I think it's actually Pelion, but Thrawn accepts it. He's like, I'm not going to reject a good idea just because I didn't think of it, basically. So kind of almost makes him even more dangerous, I feel like. He's actually, that's what it was, I'm sorry. It was Pelion. Thrawn and Sabaoth were debating something. I believe how Sabaoth was going to do the battle meditation for Thrawn and yet still try to capture Luke, because that's why they're trying to kidnap Luke and Leia. And they're sort of almost arguing, and Pelion basically comes up with this really brilliant solution of basically starting rumors as to where Sabaoth might be, so that Luke will be curious, because Luke is basically wanting to find other Force users. And Thrawn, having not thought of it, doesn't get upset. He's like, it's a good idea, let's put it in motion. So kind of, again, setting him apart from, Vader and the Emperor, who are like, we're doing it my way or nothing.
Right, yeah, the table's open when it comes to ideas and everything, whereas Palpatine and Vader and other evil characters in the Star Wars universe are more or less like quiet. The grown-ups are talking,
right?
And that's not what happens with Pelion. He tables an idea, and it's mulled over and almost instantly accepted because of its ingenuity about it. And that, like you said, that just makes him all the more dangerous, because Thrawn is willing to listen to other ideas and learn from friend and foe alike.
And they give you that. They basically tell you he's cerebral. With all the artwork and learning how people think and everything, you get that there's a lot more to him than just like the pure aggression that some of the other bad guys have. Basically, he's a thinker as well. So I'm going to kind of let you on these next pages and chapter kind of take the lead a little bit. I think from 95 all the way up until about 107, I don't have a whole lot. They do battle meditation again. Sabaoth does it. But real quick, something that's a personal favorite of mine is the beginning of that chapter 9, 95 and 96. We get a micro jump. The very first one ever. And go ahead on that.
I was going to say, so this is the first time we see that micro jump in print, but in not film, but on the screen. It had to have been. It wasn't Rebels, was it?
Solo is the first time you see it, I believe.
Okay.
They might do one in Rebels as well, maybe. But like the first time on the actual movie screen was Solo. So basically, this idea, kind of hard to explain, but instead of a hyperspace jump basically going all the way across the galaxy, they use it more to surprise people. So instead of jumping straight to where you want to go, they purposefully come up a little bit short and then pick a different angle to come into the system from, and they're able to basically make it look like they came out of nowhere. And
if you watch the movies, when they get ready to make their jump to hyperspace, they take those levers and they come all the way down, and then they enter hyperspace and everything. With a micro jump, it's essentially like taking a light switch and flicking it on and off real quick. Mm-hmm. Is basically what it is. It lets you get there, but it instantly hard stop, kind of like what Chewie did on I'm sorry.
Right, and again, kind of going to your comment about Thrawn and the Chimera, his Star Destroyer being a well-oiled machine. They basically say that they've done this many times before the novel even started in their kind of hit-and-run attacks against the New Republic. But we get to see him talk about it. And so his whole crew, even without, any Force users, is able to pull it off. So kind of showing how he's able to elevate these people and get them to perform at a high level.
I actually wrote a little bit about that micro jump because Thrawn performs a micro jump, and as soon as he comes out of hyperspace, he deploys TIE fighters, squadron upon squadron of TIE fighters. And I wrote down that I really enjoyed that mental picture. Just suddenly a gigantic Star Destroyer just appearing out of nowhere, and out of the hangar bays are TIE fighters just streaming like a swarm of angry bees or something like that. It was a really enjoyable mental picture that I had.
Right, and again, more discussion for later episodes. Zahn is pretty good at describing the space battles, but there's a couple guys, there's a couple other authors that work on like the X-Wing series and some of the other books that make the space battles really enjoyable, even for someone like me who doesn't necessarily have the best imagination. They make it where you're able to really follow along and see what's happening, and so this is a good start for all of that stuff coming up.
This is also a good time as any to kind of introduce a few new terms to readers who might not know the terms used in these space battles. Zahn borrows pretty heavily from nautical terms, from terms used in the Navy. So the ships, where you are in contextual to the where the ship is, that he uses naval terms like bow, starboard, port, stern, aft, and stern.
Yeah.
So,
and also we get a few new not new really, I guess, if you watch the movies, but they start talking about the different types of weapons and gear that these ships have, and there's almost like there really could be a chart to it, but they use turbo lasers for basically firing at other big ships and bases or maybe even facilities on the ground. They have laser cannons, which are supposed to shoot down the faster ships like the X-Wings and TIE fighters. And then they have ion cannons too, for when they want to try to short out or disable a ship and capture it. Kind of like an EMP, basically, just shuts off all the computers and electronics.
Get at their shields. Those are the weapons. As far as the ship's locations, the bow would be the front. The stern and the aft are both kind of synonymous. They're both the rear of the ship. Mm-hmm. Starboard would be the right side, and port would be the left side. Right. So if you're reading and you're trying to contextualize yourself on what's going on around the character you're reading about, hopefully that helps you put direction on what they're saying.
Okay, yep, that's good. And they start talking again. There's a little bit. There's the battle meditation in here with Sabaoth kind of basically helping them fight, and Pelion notices he's a little bit uncomfortable with it. He notices that they're actually basically 40% more efficient with Sabaoth kind of controlling the minds of everybody who's doing all the important tasks, like actually, plotting the course of the ship and firing the weapons and so forth.
Yeah, it kind of gives you an idea of how dangerous battle meditation can be for one who actually has it, because you're when you're performing that much more efficiently than a normal crew and a normal fleet, it's scary because you can more or less wipe the floor with your battle meditation enhanced soldiers.
Right, exactly. And then we kind of jump. There's a little bit more with Talon Card there, basically. I don't know if you had any notes on that. I didn't have a whole lot there. Kind of shows his kind of MO. He likes to gather information. So even though Thrawn attacking this planet stops him from doing his smuggling run, he hangs around a little bit just so he can try to... Any information is basically just as good as gold to him. Even sensor readings and, how efficient ships are, how fast they're going, which direction they leave the system from. Like, he takes all of that, and that's kind of his thing. That's how he knows so much about what's going on. That's how he makes his money. So it's another little insight into his character.
Yeah, I wrote down that we see Talon and his crew observe Thrawn and his fleet as they leave. And any other situation, probably wouldn't have given it a second thought. But it was Thrawn's technique with the ships he had is what piqued his attention. Right. It was they call it a hit and fade attack with Star Destroyers. Now, usually a hit and a fade would be used with single pilot starfighters. It's more or less like a guerrilla attack. You just kind of ambush someone, attack real quick, and then just disappear back into the woods.
Right.
And Thrawn did that with capital ships, with Star Destroyers.
Right.
So seeing that happen with such large ships, he got interested in what is actually going on and what is this Thrawn person all about.
Right. And then we kind of quick cut. They kind of do it almost the way Lucas does. They immediately jump over to something else. Leia trying to get lessons. It's not going very well because she doesn't have time to practice.
Brand new lightsaber.
Right. Go ahead.
I was going to say, this is the first hint of the different direction that the Legends books went with Leia and her character, as opposed to canon Leia and where she went.
Right.
Canon Leia decided to stay on the political side, whereas Legends Leia definitely decided to go the Jedi route, and she becomes a she can hold her own. Don't want to spoil it. She can hold her own.
Right, and it's still going to take a while. She still is pretty heavily involved in the political side of things, but she doesn't. The canon Leia almost seems to just kind of take the Force training as kind of an afterthought almost. Even in some of the novels I read, there's not a whole lot talked about it. But this Leia, she at least takes the little free time she does get to try to do it, because she's trying to protect her children, which actually I don't think we've even mentioned that yet.
We didn't even. Leia's pregnant.
With twins.
With twins.
And so she wants to protect the children. That's also the reason that Sabaoth is so interested, because he thinks that he can make these kids basically be his own personal apprentices that can help him conquer the galaxy in the future. So definitely some reasons for Leia to want to protect herself. So then we get... Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, I think another reason why Leia might have decided to go the Jedi route, I mean, not to downplay any of the political... Can you guys hear my dog squeaking his toy? The whole reestablishing a brand new government is surely a huge undertaking, but at the same time, Luke's knowledge is the only Force-sensitive person or intelligent, species that is the Force-sensitive, and she obviously has that draw to support him in this huge undertaking himself of trying to find these Force-sensitives and support, finding these protectors of the galaxy again.
Right, and he feels like he needs trained Jedi because of how big the Star Wars galaxy is and all the, unfinished business, because like this book shows you that even though Return of the Jedi was a huge victory for the rebels and the good guys, it wasn't over by any means. Yeah. So then we get that training, a little bit of training before, let me see here. I think they send out Han and Leia to kind of do some damage control and kind of reassure the public, basically, that the New Republic is on it. They're wanting to protect their people.
Yeah, I didn't really contextualize my notes, but Han and Leia agree to go to Bipfash to see what happened. I never wrote down what happened, but Luke can't go because the Bipfashi, much like the Bimasari, they don't like Jedi. And in the midst of the conversation, they name-dropped Dagobah.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, Luke really didn't care about what happened on Bipfash because someone mentioned Dagobah, and he thought he was keeping that secret pretty well kept.
Right.
So now he has a mission of his own to see who went to Dagobah and why, and what did they leave there.
Right. Which also differs from new canon as well. There's some comics and different things that talk about that. But again, so they're the heroes are splitting up and going their separate ways. Really quick, before the chapter is over, it's on 107 and 108. Luke kind of decides to just basically do, I'm going to say, the Jedi equivalent of going to the gym to blow off some steam, turns the remote on full setting, and basically spends an entire 20 minutes blocking an insane amount of blaster bolts and not getting hit once.
Nope.
He gets so into his routine, he doesn't even notice that the safety timer turns off after 20 minits.
It says that he gets confused.
Right, why did it stop, basically?
He was so focused, and it stopped, and he was just staring at it like, what's wrong with you? But it's more evidence of Luke's growing mastery of the Force, and much like his first encounter with those Nogri abductors, this stuff is really interesting to see because I don't think they explored it as much as they could have in the sequel trilogy. So this sequel stuff is really fun to see Luke become a force to reckon with.
Right.
Pun not intended. Moving on to Chapter 10, we get to see some more of Leia's growing mastery of the Force. In the chapter, she can sense Han and Wedge. Hold on. I have terrible writing. She can sense Han and Wedge in danger a moment before another Nogri attack. And this time they're pinned. They're in some real hot water as they don't know where to go and what to do because they were completely surprise attacked.
Right, and we also get to see there's a couple things in this I like. First, the Nogri, despite getting this, like, Zahn gives them this almost like animalistic look, like this description, like you almost don't even know if they could speak. I don't think they actually have spoken yet. So
not yet.
They have this like kind of like almost this like growling and glaring look to them. They almost don't look intelligent, but you can see they change plans. Like they have the heroes pinned in better. And then there's sort of a little reveal here because they're pinned down and it looks like the Falcon is coming to the rescue, but...
Yeah, Chewie sweeps in and comes in to save the day just like he did on Bimasari. Or did he?
This one is kind of cool to me because I feel like something that Lucas and then the novelists kind of took and ran with is the non-Force users can kind of hold their own too. You know, Han was a great pilot, had these quick reflexes, thought on his feet. He's very smart and observant here, and he knows his ship. So with that being said, he kind of does a little bit of his own deductive reasoning here.
And to the Nogri's credit, they see what they did to kind of foil their attempts on Bimasari, so they use that against them. It's kind of a little hint of Thrawn-like intelligence. They use another YT-1300 class freighter ship that looks just like Han Solo's to have it sweep in and come save the day just like before. And at first, everyone's, the group is in good spirits because they get out again. But Han, he knows. He knows. He
figures it out. Not only is it, I'm guessing it doesn't quite look like his ship. However, what does he say here? They dug up a working YT-1300 freighter somewhere, and the underside swivel blaster's not there. That one only makes an appearance in Empire Strikes Back, I believe. But Han notices it's not there. It's not being used. So it doesn't have that extra little modification. None of the turrets are firing. And I also believe, let's see, Leia also can't feel Chewie's presence on the ship. Again, kind of showing her skills are kind of in and out. She can't tell that right away, but once Han notices something is up and she makes herself be less distracted by the battle going on, she can't sense his presence. And so then they realize something's wrong. And so this part always amused me a little bit, I think. Han basically sabotages the heck out of that ship. I believe he stabs the engines with a lightsaber, which I would have loved to have seen that on screen.
Still the only non-Force user in the original trilogy to use lightsabers.
That's very true.
But along your point, he does that. The group does a really good job of thinking on their feet. They realize they're pinned. They realize they're cornered. So they kind of play into that illusion that they're going to get saved. They run straight for the ship, and the Nogri I don't think it says anything about them, continuing to attack, because that's what they want. They want them to get captured on that ship, but they go straight for that boarding ramp and run right past it. So everyone that's involved in that kidnapping party has a bit of a moment of confusion. At that point, Han sabotages the heck out of that ship by slicing the coolant lines to the main drive.
Right, and so not only does that disable the ship and keep them from basically being chased by it later, but it also says that Han knows exactly what sort of chemicals they use, and so it also makes an insanely bright rescue flare at the same time, and then the X-Wings show up to save everybody a few seconds later. And then we get a great Han quote. He goes, sometimes I still amaze myself, just like his character in the movies.
And it's great because they ask, like, what are you doing? He's looking at him like, isn't it obvious what I'm doing?
Right.
But he still explains it. And then he says that, sometimes I still amaze myself. Just so proud of himself.
I love this. I'm going to read it directly from the book because the X-Wings show up. Leia sees this giant plume of basically gas and fire coming out of the engine and goes, "You did that deliberately, didn't you?" And he goes, "Well, sure. Why just disable the ship when you can disable it and send up a distress signal at the same time?" So again, that whole thinking on his feet, just, fantastic stuff.
Yep. So later, aboard the real Falcon, Han and Leia consult with Admiral Akbar. Now, is this his first appearance, or did he appear earlier in the book?
He was in the council meetings.
Okay.
So we forgot to kind of mention him, but they mentioned Akbar, and Lando Calrissian actually was mentioned earlier too. I don't think he's made an actual appearance yet, but we're really quickly getting all these characters kind of, they're in the story. It's like they're making it obvious that, this is Star Wars. This is after Return of the Jedi. You very quickly get to see what everybody has been up to, basically.
So they consult with Akbar. They consult with Akbar, and he assures them that they're doing all they can to find the culprits and the reason for attacking, but they're still in danger. They're still running the risk of being attacked. So Han and Leia decide to go someplace where they won't think to attack. But where is that? It's a big galaxy, and we'll find that out in a later chapter.
Right, and then we get Lando's name mentioned basically again. Han's like, who else is going to have these underworld contacts we need? And Leia actually rolls her eyes about it. Why do I have a bad feeling about this?
Going on to Chapter 11, we switch focus to Luke, who lands in Dagobah very much the same way he did in Empire. Coming in hot and crashes, almost. Right,
and this time things are similar but not similar, I guess you could say. He finds he's landed near the cave where he had his first real mental test. Let's see here.
I wrote down that this is one of the things. I think this is the first time this happened in this book, but this is one of the. Oh no, we revisited Mos Eisley, but here we revisit Dagobah. It's going back to a location that was, heavily featured in one of the films, and you get to see how it's changed a little bit with the destruction of the Death Star. Not the destruction of the Empire quite yet, but the destruction of the Death Star, the crippling of the Empire's forces. Dagobah was and still is largely a forgotten world, and now with Yoda gone, he comes to realize that the jungle has started to reclaim Yoda's hut, and the dark side now is as powerful as ever.
Right, and let's see. He actually, I believe he goes into the cave and basically, let's see. He doesn't think anything's going to happen initially, but then we kind of get a familiar but not quite familiar thing happens. He gets yet another vision, and this was interesting to me because I almost feel like, I don't know if it's the cave or not. That would be a discussion for another day. All these powerful Force Vergences and things like that, but he actually gets a vision of Mara Jade before he's actually met her. He doesn't know that yet, but we kind of get we get like an alternate retelling of Return of the Jedi, if you will. We almost get a what-if type of scenario.
Yes, I wrote down that I appreciate the subtle hints of Luke's growing power. He's near the cave. He can sense the dark side more powerful than ever. And I wrote down, why is that? Is he more attuned to the Force so he can sense that darkness? Mm-hmm. Or is Yoda no longer there to curb that darkness? Or is it a mix of both? Right. He still, like Jared said, he steels himself. He goes into the cave confident that he can handle whatever it is, and yet again he's kind of really thrown off because the Force gave him that vision of what could have been.
Right, and again, this is actually a good example to point out that we're doing this for fun. It's not a day job. I just totally spoiled the fact that was actually Mara. They don't mention it or give any clues that it's her, but it's her. So apologies about that.
Yep.
We'll discuss that a little bit later.
There's more to just that.
Right, exactly.
To explain the vision as we see it in the chapter, he's thrown back onto the first big battle of Return of the Jedi, where he's on the sail barge avoiding execution by a Sarlacc. And let's see here.
We can condense it if you want. Instead of the normal lightsaber being shot into his hand by R2 and saving the day, it doesn't really.
That's right. No, it goes somewhere else. It lands in someone else's hands. He can't see who it is, but he can tell that the person is laughing, and he can tell that he may have died at that point of time.
Right. But then I thought this was interesting too, giving Dagobah a little more depth. When he gets thrown out of this vision, basically, he finds basically what kind of looks like a remote control, or at least some sort of alien device with a bunch of buttons on it, which is going to play into the story later. But at this point, I like kind of what Zahn does. It's got alien handwriting, and it's really nondescript. Even R2 with all his scanners doesn't really have any idea what it does.
Yeah, and so Luke knows somebody who's pretty good with electronics. Off to see Lando.
Right, so nothing happens by accident, I think Qui-Gon said. So again, we kind of see things the heroes go their separate ways, and then when they need to, it just always seems that they kind of come
find themselves back in each other's company.
And again, here on chapter 1, this chapter 12, I don't have a bunch of notes on here yet for this chapter, but it almost, again with the parallels, it happens so much in this book. Chapter 12 is almost a sort of a pseudo-retelling of Empire Strikes Back. No, I don't have a landing permit. I'm trying to reach Lando, just like before.
A bit of deja vu. Han is having trouble getting to Lando. Something about landing permits, transit permits. Either way, he finally gets it sorted out. And then soon enough, Luke is there to join them.
Right.
But Leia can't really sense him or can't really tell if it's actually Luke. So they can't really discuss any sensitive information because they already encountered a fake Falcon. So how can they tell if they're going to encounter a fake Luke or not? So they, again, quick thinking on their feet, they try to think of how can they be absolutely sure they are actually talking to Luke. So who else to talk to, who else to turn to, rather, than 3PO?
And yeah, doesn't make any sense, of course, but he is able to basically have the communication channel, and him and R2 have some back and forth. I think it's probably glad that we don't translate what they're saying, because we know how their buddy relationship is. But
R2 swears like a sailor.
Pretty much, yeah. They basically said he's a foul-mouthed toddler over and over again.
But that instant connection R2 and 3PO have is the telling, kind of the revealing that it is truly Luke, and he is exactly who he says he is, and there's not really anything to be concerned about.
Right. And then we get another a location reveal. These kind of remind me of some of the really, really good ones we've had since Disney has taken over. I have to give them at least credit for cinematography. even if I don't agree with some things. Like, there's always these huge, elaborate environments and very, well shot things. And since we don't have that, we just have these pages. We still get a really good description of this pretty inhospitable place where Lando's doing business. They have to basically follow these umbrella ships. I'll let you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the planet, I don't know if we said it, but the planet is Niklon,
right.
And it is too close to its sun for life to survive on the planet's surface. And I wrote down here that Han's galaxy savvy is on full display here because he knows exactly what's going on with the shield ships, why everything is happening, and he just kind of explains it all to Leia and Luke. Let's see here. I wrote down that he knows the unusual quirk about Niklon and that the inhabitants' workaround is that being the shield ships, these huge umbrella type ships that other starships kind of hide under and kind of use as a shield, literal shield from the sun to land on the planet's surface without being fried.
Right. And then we cut to something else, which I would love to have seen on the screen. I don't know. There's, so many great artists on the internet. Maybe somebody has drawn it and I just haven't found it. But this nomad city that they describe, it sounds really strange. I would love to see what somebody's rendition of it is. It's basically 40 of the AT-AT walkers. And then an Old Republic dreadnought, which I don't know that they've really had any of those on screen that I can think of. Maybe cartoons, perhaps. No, that's something different.
Okay.
But basically, it's 40 of the AT-AT walkers basically carrying a small capital ship on its back, and that's this town that walks to avoid the sun. It basically slowly walks away from the dark or from the light side of the sun. So they avoid the heat.
In shadow.
Right. So just something I wish there was a mock-up of it.
Yeah.
It sounds really impressive. Lando's always got some sort of crazy business scheme, and here's another one.
First he was in the sky with a planet that was completely made out of gas on Bespin, and now he's here on a planet that's too close to its own sun, and if he goes in the light, he fries alive. He really knows how to pick his places.
Right. And then we get real quick at the end of that chapter, we find that a Star Destroyer is following one of the shield ships in. Actually, it's not following the shield ships in, excuse me. It's coming in towards the planet side. We're going to discuss that. I think that's right there in chapter 13. Let's see. And they actually launched TIE fighters at the Heroes. We're going to learn a little bit about the tactics, but while Luke is helping Han and the Falcon fight them off, he gets contacted by Master Sabaoth. So we get to see another force power in use here.
Yeah, when they encounter that Star Destroyer, and with Niklon's orbit being dangerously close to the sun, the result of that is most starships' sensors and radars don't work. So almost everyone who is piloting a ship has to rely on visual confirmation.
Right.
So Luke's plan is to fly ahead and try a large-scale mind trick to further confuse and befuddle the Star Destroyer and the crew. But little does he know, he encounters someone.
So Luke is contacted long distance by Sabaoth here. And we get to see some more tension between Thrawn and Sabaoth because going off script, it doesn't really derail Thrawn's plans, but he doesn't like the fact that there's been extra damage to one of his ships. There's been some other things that have happened that he didn't really plan for. And so Thrawn, being ever the strategist, starts taking steps there on those few pages. He wants to just get Luke out of the way. He thinks that Luke is too big of a distraction for Sabaoth, and he says it'd be easier for me to deal with this deranged old Jedi than it will be for Sabaoth to be trying to convert Luke and still follow Thrawn's plans.
Right. Yeah, Thrawn doesn't like that. He likes everything to happen as planned, and although he can account for stuff that happens spontaneously, it's not his most favorite thing to happen.
Right. He would rather not have to improvise if he can help it. So he doesn't like
Right.
wrenches getting thrown in that he couldn't plan or foresee for. And so then after that, again, he starts making plans to capture the Millennium Falcon, capture Luke, and deal with them in his own way. And then we cut back to Lando, kind of in a familiar place, having to deal with his business being disrupted because Han and Leia showed up.
Yep, and I wrote it's reminiscent of our first introduction to Lando in Empire. He's cranky, but he switches it off and turns on the charm, and he is as charming as ever.
The difference being that he is firmly on the good guy's side basically now for the rest of the novels. He has completely reformed himself, so he's not that gray area character that Lucas wanted anymore, but he's still frustrated that he lost some money and lost some equipment because of this Imperial attack.
Yep. And Luke isn't present for this, but eventually he'll join the others in the midst of this scene, and he will present the mysterious artifact he found on Dagobah from Chapter 11, and he'll show it to Lando. And Lando himself, displaying some galaxy savvy, almost immediately knows what it is.
Right. It's called a beckon call, which is basically... It's a super fancy version of the remote we might use to open and close the doors on our cars, lock it and everything. This can actually remote control a ship. And so Lando talks about it. Beckon calls actually get used quite often, kind of going forward from this, especially for personal vehicles like, your Millennium Falcon or Lando's ship or different smuggler ships. It allows the ship to be controlled by remote, and sometimes... If it's a really good remote, the ship can actually have pre-programmed the ability to defend itself without anybody being aboard.
It's remote start on steroids is what it
Basically, yeah. And so there's a whole lot of planning in the next few pages here in Chapter 14. I didn't get to go a whole lot over it, but it's this big scheme. Basically, it shows how much the... heroes are having to scramble and try to improvise to keep Thrawn off of their tail. There's a huge, basically a plan to do like some trickery and some voice impersonation. Do you have any notes on that?
Yeah, this was several pages of conversation and planning and scheming, but they finally decide to go to Kashyyyk. Did they... I think they disclosed that. I didn't pull a Jared and spoil who. I didn't spoil something, did I?
No, they talk about going to Kashyyyk. I don't know if they do it yet, but it's on the list of possible hiding places at this point because they're trying to think, where can we possibly go where we can be protected?
Yeah, there is a conversation between Luke and Leia about Dagobah, but they kind of put that on the back burner. Mm-hmm. There's more pressing matters, much like Leia and her twins' safety. So they decide to send Leia with Chewie to Kashyyyk.
He volunteers, so you're right about that. They definitely are going to Kashyyyk, which is something... I'll let you talk about it. I know it's a kind of a expanded universe place that you've been a little bit interested in over the years.
I have. Yeah, it's been. I don't know when I first heard about that forest, but when I heard it was just a jungle planet, just as grand as it is, I was really excited to read about this. They decide to send Leia to Kashyyyk with Chewie on Lando's ship, part of that scheming. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Lando and Han and 3PO are going to be on the Falcon, just kind of jet-setting wherever they feel like to kind of throw the Nogri off the scent of the trail.
Right.
They know the Falcon is where Leia is most likely to be, so they're hoping to do a little bit of trickery and throw them off with 3PO's help, which I found in the audio version was the best part out of the whole.
Hilarious. And this is Mark Thompson, correct? Did I get the name right?
Yes.
So for anybody who wants to listen to any of the audiobooks, if you have one of his, which he does the Thrawn trilogy, I believe he does the Darth Bane trilogy as well.
Jonathan Davis.
Jonathan Davis. Okay, I'm sorry. But Mark Thompson's done a few of the audiobooks, and he always is a fantastic listen. He does very good impressions of the characters' voices, gives it a little extra personality. Let me see. We're going to talk about it more, I think probably in the next episode when we do the second half of this book. But Kashyyyk, we get really huge details on it later. But we don't actually see Kashyyyk until, on screen in episode 3, and then also Knights of the Old Republic is the first time we actually see it, I believe.
Which was 2003.
I guess you could count Star Wars Galaxies if you're making a huge obscure reference about video games, but you don't really get to see it on the screen. So nice that we're going to get to visit somewhere new, basically. And then that 3PO moment, that was hilarious. Him imitating Leia's voice.
Yeah, so what happened is, in order to throw the Noghri off the trail, since Leia is going to be on Kashyyyk, they need a definitive way to make the Noghri and anyone else who is following them believe that Leia is still with Han on the Falcon. So they take 3PO and reprogram his voice to sound exactly like Leia.
Right.
Now, to imagine 3PO's fussiness and prissiness and general worrisome manner, but in Leia's voice, was really, really entertaining.
It was very, very funny.
It was great.
So then we jump to chapter 15, and we see that the trickery doesn't last very long.
Not at all. The opening dialogue, though, in this chapter does something that every Star Wars movie has done before, and they already did it a little bit earlier in this book. Mm-hmm. Han and Lando reference an adventure they had on a planet that we've never seen before.
Right.
And they both know exactly what they're talking about, and they both come to an agreement on what they think about that adventure, but then they never mention it again. And it's just more of that world building that this is a galaxy, and this galaxy is huge, and there is a lot to see and to do in this galaxy, and this is just one small little prism of what goes on in the grand scheme of things.
Right. And again, people staying in character. Lando's like, yeah, we can jet set around, but I wouldn't mind trying to find some equipment to replace what I lost. Those mole mining machines, which Thrawn stole from him, basically. Yep. And let's see here.
Speaking of Thrawn, his crew, they with I think they had pro droids out there or something like that, just kind of monitoring what's going on. They see Lando's ship named the Lady Luck and Han's Falcon. They were docked together. And then eventually they, break the docking and go their separate ways. And Thrawn is almost instantly able to deduce what happened, who went where, and where. I think almost where they went.
Yes,
if he was speculating.
I have it as page 171 through 174. It's almost that Sherlock Holmes type ability that you say he has. We're kind of seeing his internal thought process a little bit. There's a little inner monologue. There's a little bit of him talking with, I think, Pelion and the technicians. But he basically, in a few minutes, is able to see through the trickery. He uses things like, let's see here. He counts the amount of time that the ships are docked and says, based on that and how fast people walk and how fast droids move, they could have only transferred people this way and that way. And Han wouldn't ever want to be separated from his ship or something like that. So that means he definitely separated from his ship because they're trying to throw him off. So they get it all. He immediately sees through it and says, yep, Leia and Chewie are on the Falcon. They went to Kashyyyk. Or they're on the Lady Luck, excuse me, right?
They're on the Lady Luck,
and the Falcon left. So he's able to figure this out in like just a few minutes. And it's really interesting because he doesn't have any force powers. They made that very clear. He's very intellectual and very calculating. It's not the same type of villain that we normally see.
And Pelion, he tried. He thought he had it all figured out. He goes, great, but we have verbal confirmation that Leia is indeed on the Falcon, and Thrawn's like, really? Is she?
Right.
And
he's like, there's a protocol droid that could be reprogrammed, and Lando has resources, so this definitely is fake.
And you can almost just sense Pellaeon just sag. All right, you're right.
Right. And then they also are going to, let me jump over here. Then we get to page 175, 176, the end of the chapter, and something that I really was kind of excited for as a sci-fi ship and technology fan. We get a new ship. We get the Interdictor Cruiser for the very first time. But basically what this ship does is it's kind of a baby Star Destroyer, if you want to imagine that. It's still a wedge, but it's smaller. But what it does is we're going to have it right here to bring Skywalker out of hyperspace where we want him. So what these ships do is they basically make a giant gravity bubble, and it kind of breaks or short circuits the hyperdrives that these ships use to travel between planets. It doesn't really break them, but what it does is it makes the safeties kick in, and it makes the hyperdrive turn off, and you can't jump because of this gravity well. And so it's kind of a way to trap people long enough for you to disable their ship.
Going back to our terms from the prologue episode,
right.
Hyperspace lanes. That way back, they said that they established some hyperspace lanes that are safe to travel through either direction because they are away from planets and solar systems and everything.
Right.
And that's what these Interdictor cruisers do, is they create the illusion of a collision course with a planet. These Interdictor cruisers, like you said, they're wedge shaped, but they have like these half dome on either side, on the top side and the bottom side, that create these gravity wells. So that, like you said, the safeties kick in. The safeties kick in because they think they sense they're about to collide with a planet, is what it's basically doing.
And it does something,
full stop.
And it does something to the actual engines as well. It's not as powerful as a real star, but until you get out of that bubble, you can't jump. Even if you know it's not real, you still can't jump because of the gravity. So just kind of another tool that the bad guys have. Those don't show up in new canon until Rebels, but we get to see it here, so that's one of my favorites. I love seeing the new ships and new designs and everything. And then let's see, so then we kind of jump into the next chapter, and we get another Jedi technique here that
and this is the first instance of it, is correct. A Jedi hibernation trance is what they call it, but I think they call it something different nowadays. I don't think it's hibernation, so to speak, but it's more of a help me. What I'm thinking of. I
can't actually remember the exact term myself either. We'll have to put it like
a
little side.
If you think of it, leave a comment.
Yes, please put it in the comment section. If we mess up, we want to make sure we're looking at the right thing here. But yeah, it's basically a way to you can make long journeys without having to have extra food or water, because basically your body process slows way down, and it's almost like other sci-fis you'd be put in some sort of like cryogenic sleep or hibernation. It's basically you're able to do that, and you don't have to eat or drink while you make these long trips. You can rest. It's very good for Jedi to do it. They can actually rest and heal quicker if they're in the middle of this kind of sleep, basically.
Which is just what Luke needs, because we are 177 pages in, 15 chapters in, and this is the first instance of him actually getting to stop and basically take a breather. It has been nonstop going since chapter 1.
Right. And he's still uncomfortable. He has to be crammed in the little X-Wing, but at least he can take the hibernation and at least recover a little bit. Or so he thinks.
Yeah, I actually wrote down that I don't think this was a force-induced trance like we're reading here, but we see something similar in episode 1.
Correct.
In the big duel between Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon, and those big energy barriers, go between Qui-Gon and Darth Maul, Qui-Gon instantly kneels down, takes a deep breath, and just seemingly goes to sleep. And that's basically what it is. He's bringing himself back to his center. He's healing what he can, and he's just kind of recentering himself before more action happens. And that's essentially what Luke is doing here in his X-Wing.
It's pretty much that. It's just a longer version of it. And you can still get stirred out of it because immediately we get the interdictor pulling him out of hyperspace and
R2 screaming his head off.
Exactly. And more manipulation by Thrawn here. Luke doesn't really know or doesn't really get too much of a chance to care because this fake freighter is destroyed pretty quickly, but they're trying to make it look like, oh, we accidentally stopped some smugglers and we happened to blow up Luke's X-Wing. Sorry, Master Sabaoth. He didn't make it. Because Thrawn has basically had enough at this point and wants to get rid of Luke. So we get to see Luke using the Force and his piloting skills here.
This was the most pulse-pounding action sequence that, for me at least, I enjoyed this action sequence the most up to this point.
Right.
Luke, he's this one lone starfighter, this one lone X-Wing against this interdictor cruiser, this Star Destroyer that's coming in, and all these odds are just mounting up against him, and Luke has to literally think he's got to get himself out of the situation.
Right.
And that's what it is.
It's very desperate. It's like, even a Jedi pilot, you're not going to be able to get out of that gravity trap before all of the Star Destroyer's weapons hit you. Like, nobody's that fast. And so we get to see some quick thinking, and I like this too because this is a setup for a lot of space action sequences we see in a lot of the other Legends books. Some of the techniques Luke uses, some of the different things that are happening here. I kind of like the part he basically uses one of his torpedoes to confuse the tractor beam, and at this point it's going to be an obscure reference unless any of you have read some of the other novels, but him basically using the Force to kind of push a torpedo and adjust it on its course a little bit. This is something that gets refined later where you have Jedi basically guiding torpedoes with the Force, and so that way they can't be jammed by any countermeasures or anything like that. So again, this is another setup for something that happens later.
And another neat little trivia bit, this is Timothy Zahn introduced the term the etheric rudder that was attached to ships. It's essentially the thing that helps it turn. But eventually the term was completely dropped, and it hasn't been mentioned in a good long time.
I think what they do is they just shave it down to rudder pedals for the X-Wing series because, again, like you said, they borrow these nautical and aviation terms, and so actual planes and aircraft, they do have rudder pedals, but I think Zahn tried to get a little fancy with the name, and so eventually they just say X-Wings and TIE fighters have rudder pedals instead. Yeah, I think that's what they did.
Yeah, I wrote down that because I listened to behind the scenes audio from Timothy Zahn himself. It's about 2 hours long, and a lot of the stuff I wrote down is drawn from that. And he said that the idea behind the etheric rudder was to add a bit of believability that a starship could maneuver itself in space, but the term never really caught on, and eventually it was dropped altogether. But it was a neat little thing to add just what he wanted, a little bit of believability. It's like, oh yeah, that's how it would turn.
It's a fighter jet, but in space. Like, it's things that are real almost, which we talked about in our previous video.
Yes.
So, again, Luke is finally able to escape from this. We're not going to really cover this until the next episode, but he does all kinds of things. He does the torpedo launching. He does something called a reverse acceleration, where he basically throws the ship in reverse and then in full forward throttle again to all of these things together, and he is able to break the tractor beam lock and finally escape into hyperspace.
And all that, it comes at a price. We don't find out what it is till the next chapter. The end of this chapter is mostly dealing with Thrawn's show of power and how much he expects from his crew, because somebody didn't do their job quite right and they paid the price for it.
Right. This is the first. I kind of felt like this almost brought us back a little bit, because Thrawn is so. He's not mild. He's definitely an aggressive, inventive tactician, but he has almost this nobility and this sophistication about him. He accepts ideas from his underlings and his other crew members. He wants them to be efficient, but he's able to motivate them. And then you get this, and you're like, okay, he's an Imperial still.
Yeah,
He still won't tolerate failure for too long.
Exactly. All that he does accept and that makes him different from an Imperial. The flip side is he runs a very tight ship, and he expects high things from all his crew, and when they fail, the price you pay is pretty severe, and he has that person killed.
Right, and he, no force powers, but he's got his Nogri to do the dirty work for him. So
I thought that was a really neat, subtle show of power, that he doesn't even need to lift a finger to do his to do this punishment, to do this dirty work. He has people to do it for him, and he gets to walk away and keep his hands clean, proverbially.
Right. Okay, so this is for a little novel, this has a huge amount of material in it. So in the interest of wanting to cover things the way they should be covered, and yet still having a somewhat respectable runtime, we're actually splitting this book. So we really, really appreciate everyone tuning in today and watching this. A huge thank you to everyone who watched our introduction episode as well. We got over 80 views on that, and multiple new followers on the Instagram page. So we really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, that may not seem like much compared to other YouTube videos or other YouTube channels, but for a grassroots operation like ourselves, this has been huge. So thank you very, very much.
Yes, and as usual, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. Also, if you are interested and you want to help us eventually someday have better equipment and make better content, you can also donate on our Patreon. We're going to have links for that up as well.
And also, feel free to follow us on Instagram at, this is all lowercase, library.of.zur. It's all one word, no spaces. And you can follow us there for any of the latest updates regarding the future episodes. And just a little reminder, we've mentioned it before, please keep all conversations, discussions, and theories clean and respectful. This world is full of scum and villainy, and we don't need to contribute to any of that.
Exactly. And now that we have the episodes up and running, you might see other little tidbits as well. Since, again, we mentioned the time and the actual distance that we have, we both have control over that page. So, if there is a new piece of a book that we enjoyed, or a section from a video game, you might see little in-between posts here and there about that as well. Yep. We want to try to have more content on there. Yep. So, with that being said, we really hope that you enjoyed this. And again, stay tuned for part 2 of our discussion. We're going to continue to break down this Heir of the Empire novel. And we also wanted to leave you with a parting question. In your opinion, out of the books that you've read, the movies you've seen, who is the most underappreciated character in the Star Wars universe? Leave your thoughts on that in the comments section. And or on the Instagram page. And, until next time, I don't know, fly casual.
And remember, luminous beings we are.